If you are what you say you are, a superstar, then have no fear. The crowd is here and the lights are on.
So congratulations, you've made it to our last video. This one is probably the most important and hopefully the most helpful. I asked each of our mentors what advice they would give to new lawyers. Now remember, this is from their perspective, someone who has made it through the gauntlet to success and someone who managed other lawyers. So this is their advice from their perspective. You are in a different age, you're in a different experience, so you're just going to have to adapt whatever resonates with you into advice going forward. But first, I'll give you a couple of pieces that I've put together. And the first one is, ironically, be careful who you get advice from. I can remember the first year academy. I was part of a class of 125 new lawyers at the firm. And during our first year, everybody got together, and there were 5 or 6 second or third years who were giving advice to everybody on how to succeed at the law firm. It didn't really make sense to me, but I can tell you that the advice that they gave indicated that there is no way that I would make it through. I was in a branch office. I was working with a mentor who was not going to be around when I made partner. I was in a specialty area that wasn't high tech or litigation. There was no way that I was going to make it in their estimation. Well, I was one of 6 partners made out of the class of 125, and I can tell you that those 5 or 6 lawyers who were giving advice to everyone, not a single one of them did make it through. Matter of fact, most of them were fired for some type of problem that they had during their career. So be careful who you get advice from. Number 2, remember that success takes a long time, but failure can be achieved almost immediately. You can fail on any day that you go into the office. You can ruin your career. You can make a mistake. You can give terrible advice. You can be a problem in some unknown way. So just remember, this is a marathon to succeed, but it's a sprint to fail. And the last one is, try to make sure that everything you do, you're increasing your own personal knowledge base. I didn't care where I worked, what assignment it was. If I was learning something, I thought that I was increasing my value to me, to my future employer, or to the current employer. So just make sure you're learning something, whatever you're doing. So now for the advice from our experts. Just remember, they're reaching back in their knowledge to try to send the elevator down to you, to try to find a way to help you, somebody they've never met, be successful in your career. Hope it helps.
You know, being a new lawyer involved in an M&A transaction is both a burden and a great opportunity. The younger lawyers on the team are going to be the ones who are going to work the hardest, probably, at least in terms of hours. I think they can expect to put in long hours, and I think if you're concerned or interested in your career, I think working hard is a big piece of it. I think you need to be there before the boss gets there, and you need to stay there after the boss leaves. And that can be, listen, that can put quite a strain on an individual, especially as they're starting out in their career. But it's a great opportunity too to learn. This is M&A transactions are a significant piece of the legal profession, and one of the most, at least in my experience, what I hear from the young law students that I'm teaching, so many of them want to do transactional work, and I think that one of the reasons for that is it's probably one of the more profitable pieces of the law practice these days. So it's a great opportunity in terms of advancement, in terms of compensation. And it's a great opportunity to learn from people who have had that wisdom and that experience over the years. And I can't stress that enough. I think having the opportunity to work with people who have done so many of these kinds of deals is something that you can never learn in law school, and can actually turn you into one of the leaders as your career progresses.
I think courage is important. I think patience is important. I think an emotional intelligence to see when you're pushing the other side too far. But I think all the people who have been good have not been trying to deny the other side some greatness. It's not that we're trying to win. I'm trying to accomplish something important for my side. I'm focused on that, and I'm willing to really put that as my primary goal, as opposed to winning or you know, crushing the other side.
The other really memorable story that I have from a transaction was a very large public company that I was representing the seller, and a very large law firm in New York was representing the buyer. And the transaction was announced. These were both public companies that we were dealing with. And about a month or so after the acquisition was announced, but before it closed, there was press because one of the associates, her husband, had kind of learned somehow, either she told him or she left some documents laying around. He learned about the transaction and went and invested a bunch of money in my client's stock. And he was arrested and thrown in jail. And she lost her job. And it was all very sad. She and her husband were both on international work visas, and they were kicked out of the country. And he went to, like, it was all bad, but it was a learning moment for my team, because I got to remind them, hey, to the extent you don't remember always that it's really important that you keep this confidential, even from your spouse. You need to do that.
And then I think very importantly, find your client's blind spot or gap in their understanding and really work to protect it, because they're going to have blind spots that they may not even know. And so in a very sort of servant leadership way, try to identify what that blind spot is and be there to help them.
Practice patience. This area that you feel you want to go into is a long-term path. You have the basic skills when you come out of law school, probably to understand that, I hope, to understand the terms of an M&A transactional document. But to do M&A, you need to learn your craft. So my best advice is to take the opportunity to sit and listen anytime you get that opportunity within your own office. Be the person. Can I just, if there's a lawyer that's working on a transaction and they've got a deal call coming up, ask him, can I sit on the couch and just listen? Can I sit on the couch and just listen? Because listening to the people who have spent decades learning how to do this will teach you an awful lot that you will not learn to know. Second, volunteer for the hard transactions. You learn way more in tough times and in hard deals than you do in easier transactions. There's a greater likelihood that they'll fall apart. So the deal doesn't get done. Maybe that you think that that's not as good for you, but you learn more in tough deals than you learn in easy deals. And lastly, I would say patience again. Don't be in a hurry. Everybody wants to talk to the CEO. Everybody wants to be in the board meeting. But the truth is that CEO is going to be long gone before you're in the chair of partner, or you're in the chair of a banker, whatever chair you morph to. Take the time in every transaction you do to reach out to your compatriots, your level members of the deal team, and start to build those relationships. Because you know what? That analyst that works over at the investment bank is going to be the guy at that investment bank or some other investment bank 10 years from now, when you're the guy at your law firm. And if they go in-house somewhere, if you're talking to the accountant, they're going to be the CFO, and you're going to have a 10-year relationship with them. And if you start, when you start as a junior lawyer and you start to build those relationships, they will greatly inure to your benefit when you're a new partner and it's all about building your own client base.
I had grown up in a very close family. I had loving parents and great mentors all my whole life. My dad worked in a shipyard, and he came home every day at 4:30, coaching my little league team. And I loved my dad. I admired him greatly. And in the law firm, I was learning a bunch. I had great people around me, but I was literally working 3,000 hours a year. I built 3,000 hours 3 years in a row, which is almost impossible. But it meant working 7 days a week, which was fine because my wife, was in college and she could come into the library at night, study, blah blah blah. And so we could have dinner and make Google eyes in the library and go home, and I could still have a life. But when my first son was born, it was no longer possible to have that idyllic family life and still have that kind of career. So I literally chose the easiest job I could find that would still pay the bills. And so I could get home as early as I can and be there as my son began to recognize me as his dad. And it turned out that, if you do good work, they're going to find you in the corporate world too, and you're going to end up working hard. But to be able to say I wanted to be a man before I was a lawyer, to be a dad and a husband before I was a successful lawyer, I think turned out to be a wise choice for me. You do good work, you're going to get found no matter where you are. But it was a good choice for me.
I think the one piece of advice I would give a young M&A professional is take every opportunity to learn new things, different, work with different people, learn different approaches to negotiating, learn different industries. You will be presented with lots of options for different transactions, and take the ones not that look like the last deal you did, but take the ones that look like something new and interesting to do, because that learning will make you a much better lawyer or M&A professional over time.
My experience on mentors is that they choose you. You don't get to choose them. Listen, I've heard stories of people who have had great mentors, and I've heard stories about people who have had bad mentors. And I think obviously having the opportunity to work with a good mentor is a big deal, but I will also say you can learn a lot from a bad mentor as well, because you can learn about things that one ought not be doing as a mentor. And I think even working for a bad mentor will make you a greater mentor when you're finally, your career is in the position where you can start mentoring others. So I don't think you get to choose a mentor. Maybe you do, and that's a great opportunity. I did not get to choose mine. They were the bosses, and they selected me to work on particular projects and issues. And fortunately, I had some that I thought were great mentors. That's not to say that they were perfect. They certainly were not. But I think I learned from their imperfections as much as I learned from their great traits as mentors.
The only way to learn is on the job. And the first transactions you'll be involved in, you probably aren't the lead negotiator. But working with a lawyer who has good negotiation skills, you need to understand the environment for your assets. Is it a seller environment? Is it a buyer's environment? Can you, in terms of the indemnity, can you get a strong indemnity? Do you have a seller who can stand behind indemnities, that sort of thing? But honestly, it really comes down to negotiation skills, and every single transaction is different. And what's important in a transaction is different from deal to deal. But I think I learned the most by working with lawyers, and then you get the opportunity to do a deal on your own, and you feel like you're kind of hanging out there a little bit, but you've got somebody to bounce things off of. And I think that's one of the most important aspects of learning transactions is to have someone to bounce things off of. And I think in a law firm environment, that's what I liked, because I could go down the hall and talk to other lawyers who had done similar deals. A little different when you're in-house, because in-house, I tended to be sort of on my own. I worked in some small legal departments. Very different when I got to Williams, which was a much larger legal department. But I think having people to bounce things off of and working with a lawyer who has experience in negotiating M&A deals is really, if you can get that experience, do whatever you can to take advantage of it.
The one thing I will say about M&A is it's surprising how small the fraternity is. You go out into the big world and you think you're going to have thousands and thousands and thousands of lawyers. But if you do this as a career, the universe, if you run into the same people over and over again, if you really do develop good relationships with them, it inures to your benefit over and over and over again. People recommend you to. It's an amazing thing. It's a much smaller world than we all think it is.
Advice would I give to someone who's just starting out as an M&A lawyer? I think two things. Number one, own your part of the deal. Feel like you have the responsibility for whatever your piece of the deal is, and no one else is going to look over your work. Really, really own it, and know that no one's asking you to do something that is pointless. If they're asking you to look at a document or to review things or summarize things, and it may seem mundane, they're asking because it's actually really important, and take that seriously. I think other than ownership, my other piece of advice would be curious, be really curious. Try to get a sense of where your part of the deal fits in the larger picture. Why does your client want to acquire this, whatever the target is? What's interesting about it? Why is this a growth industry or not? Try to put the whole thing in a larger context. If somebody says, gosh, I don't really know how that piece of the DTC works for closing securities transactions, go find out, go read about it. You might become an expert on something, but you'll also learn something for bigger context. I used to have transaction meetings after every single large transaction where we sat with my team so that the young lawyers could ask all the questions of, this happened, things were moving really fast, but I didn't really understand why. And I think if you ask people to do that, to have that meeting or spend 20 minutes and explain why something happened or why somebody made a decision about materiality clauses, you can learn a lot, and it'll make you a much better lawyer over time.
I'm trying to find a balance between work and a career and your home life is very difficult. And one thing I always think about, there's a sandwich shop in Texas called Jimmy John Sandwiches, and they always have these slogans on their walls. And one of the slogans is never confuse your career with your life. And I have carried that with me for many years. And it is a very difficult thing to do, to balance career and life, especially if you have ambition and want to succeed. And I really can't say exactly how to do it, except it's helpful to have a spouse that is understanding and children who are understanding. And I remember my mother asked me once, do you think you're a great lawyer? And I said, no, I think I'm a good lawyer. What? You're not a great lawyer? I said, I think it's very difficult to be great at everything you do. And I think finding that balance is a very important part of succeeding in not only career, but in life.
I think the advice that I would give an aspiring M&A transaction lawyer really would be twofold. The first is be a really active apprentice. We hear today that people's jobs can be done largely from home, largely by Zoom, don't need to necessarily be in the room with people. And if we strike the right balance on that, that can be a really healthy thing. But I think when I say being an active apprentice, you've got to be around. You need to be working as closely as you can with people who have been around the block, who have done multiple deals, because they have the wisdom that comes from having done that. And you will learn things, even if your first or second year and some of the stuff you're doing seems almost ministerial, but you'll learn from being there. Try to be in the room as much as you can be, and asking questions. Ask questions after. figure out what was really going on. What were you thinking in that moment? Why were you willing to give this up and not that? And so on. Most people really like to talk about what they do. So if you ask them in the right moment, they'll tell you, they'll help you, and I think they'll reward you for your curiosity. So that would be my first piece of advice: is you want to be an active apprentice.
Think big. Be curious about everything in a transaction. Do not define your job ever in a deal where there is so much opportunity to learn about aspects beyond the ones that you're engaged with. And I think starting with knowing the business, it'll be sort of axiomatic from what I've said earlier, but I think it's critical that lawyers learn to understand and articulate and think for themselves about why a transaction is happening. And I think you can't be as effective as ultimately as you need to be, or advise your client successfully, unless you really understand why they're trying to do what they're trying to do. And if you're, in starting stages and working on contracts and schedules and bogged down in all of that, I think it helps to exercise the imagination and remember that you're part of something much bigger and better and way more interesting than a lot of what you get asked to do late at night and early in the morning. And I just think that enriches what can be a difficult experience, and I think it's essential. I would also say on the theme of curiosity, that to be and I think this is particularly important when people are starting out, that you need to be fluent in accounting. You need to know why a transaction is being structured the way it is being structured. You need to be fluent in tax. Find some mentors in your firms that can be helpful with that sort of thing. And I think it builds a toolkit that you absolutely need as you grow in your career. And then I think there's obviously, it becomes table stakes. It is table stakes, but it's a big topic, and it's constantly moving depending on the economic environment. You need to know the market for the key terms in contracts, and you need to keep up with changes. A lot of that you will learn and perceive in the daily flow of what you do, but a lot of it, I think, takes exceptional effort and curiosity to understand, how deals are getting done, and how to be a successful advisor in the context of today's market.
Sometimes your mentor picks you, and that just happens. I don't think I ever would have picked my mentor, or that he would have chosen to pick me. But we got kind of thrown together in a series of transactions, and I worked with him for 9 years. I think finding someone who is willing to invest in your career is a two-way street. So you can't just expect everybody to be willing to invest in you. You really have to show them that you can add value to their transactions, their day-to-day life, make their jobs easier. And then sometimes that person will decide to invest back. But finding somebody who has a reputation for doing that, that's one good way to do it. Finding somebody you get along with doesn't have to be in an M&A world, right? You can find somebody who is a lawyer or a banker in a different field, but who could introduce you to others, or be willing to just sit and talk to you. Sometimes mentors come out of the woodwork when you don't expect it.
I had a number of in-house positions, and I think when I interviewed for those jobs, meeting with the general counsel of companies, they always valued the fact that I had been an M&A lawyer, because I think as an M&A lawyer, particularly if you live with an acquisition after it's completed, you get to see what things you might have missed, what things that were really important to the success of the deal. And I think a lot of lawyers appreciate that, having somebody with that kind of background and experience. Even if M&A was going to be a small part of your job in the company that you were going to, having been an M&A lawyer, I think gives you a lot of credibility.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. You know, oftentimes failure is what enhances one's career. And the case I was handling against the state of Alabama is a perfect example of that. And I think back often, you know, we lost the case in the trial court, $3.5 billion. We got it reversed on appeal. We went back and tried it again, and this time the jury came back with $11.8 billion in punitive damages. And what I have often thought about is, what if we had won that case at the very beginning? What would have happened to my career? And my belief is that I would never have become vice president and general counsel had I won that case at the start, because they expected me to win the case, and it would have caused wouldn't have caused any ripples whatsoever. But losing the case and then being the lead in trying to get it reversed and bring it to a conclusion, I think is what enhanced my career significantly.